Hey everyone, it's Anya. If you've watched really any of the videos on my channel at this point, you'll probably have noticed that I tend to label myself as a naturalist. I haven't really gone into too much depth about what I understand naturalism to mean. I've kind of touched on it in a couple of different videos. And I might actually make a video on that at some point, but I don't really want to focus on that right now. What I do want to focus on is the flip side of that, because although naturalism is a really handy label for me, and it quite well sums up a lot of my beliefs and a lot of the ways that I approach paganism and tarot and things like that, particularly in that so many other pagans and tarot readers have a very, very different perspective to me. So when I say that I'm a naturalist, it straight away contrasts me with those pagans and tarot readers who have a kind of very dualistic understanding of the world, who see a split between, you know, the physical and spirit, and who generally just have a very different worldview to me. So it is a very handy label, and I do tend to use it quite extensively. But I was just thinking the other day that if I really wanted to be very accurate about my beliefs and about my worldview and about my spirituality, naturalism isn't necessarily something that I feel is really at heart level for me. It's not the be all and end all of everything for me. Sometimes I feel a little bit the same way about the word pagan. I'm not so sure about that word either. And that's another video as well. I suppose pantheism is the only word that I'm really very comfortable with when it comes to describing my beliefs, and maybe more than my beliefs, my feelings about things. So the ways in which I'm not a naturalist is, I suppose, where my starting point is with this video. It's sort of going to be a bit of a sister video to my last video on tarot, and I was focusing in that video my last lengthy video about tarot, not including the two minute tarot video I did last week, where I focused on the way that I tend to like to utilize tarot in order to ask questions rather than answer them. So first of all, while I am a naturalistic tarot reader, and I do tend to approach my theories on tarot from a very kind of psychological, scientific perspective, there are definitely aspects of the tarot experience and of my experience with other readers and my experience of reading for other people, and just the whole experience in general, that don't necessarily align perfectly with the kind of naturalistic label. And I will say straight off, there are an awful lot of different types of naturalists. Some are hardcore atheists and some are very definitely not. Some are religious people, some are extremely religious, and there's a wide scope in what people where people will draw the line. For some people, naturalism implies that everything that they believe in has to be proven by science, and then for other people it's more of a hazy kind of thing, where it's more like you take the assumption that everything in the universe works according to natural laws, but there is an awful lot about the universe that we don't currently understand, and therefore pretty much anything is up for grabs, is within the realms of possibility. I definitely think I fall within that side of the spectrum of naturalism quite strongly. And when it comes to tarot, the first word that comes to mind for me when I'm thinking about the way I approach tarot from a non-naturalistic perspective is intuition. And that's not to say that there's nothing particularly unnatural about intuition. Of course there isn't. And the way I understand intuition, it's all about the mind and the unconscious and the higher self and all of that kind of thing. It's definitely not unnatural, and it's not that I believe in anything unnatural. But I definitely believe that there is more to the human mind, and particularly in relation to intuition when it comes to intuitive readings, there's more to the mind than science currently understands, and even more to the mind than science is currently sort of angling towards. Because of course a lot of the time certain things aren't proven, but mainstream science will have a particular angle on something. They'll have a particular way that they are expecting things to go. And they don't really like to deviate too much from that when they're speculating about things. But I definitely don't like to go down that route too much at all. Intuition is obviously, from a kind of scientific psychological point of view, it's mostly about the unconscious mind and what you might call fast thinking as opposed to slow thinking. The mind basically works in two different ways. We think fast and we think slow. The slow thinking is what registers to us as conscious thoughts. It's our reasoning, our logical thinking, things like doing maths and even just thinking things through, consciously thinking about things and thinking about subjects and ruminating over things. That all happens very slowly in our minds compared to the other kinds of patterns and processes that are going on in our minds that happen actually very fast, and we don't register them as conscious thoughts. And that can be called a lot of things like the unconscious or intuition, things like that. And basically my understanding is from the reading that I've done to date is that really all these words that we have like the unconscious and intuition, or certainly some elements of them, can be explained by this particular way that the mind has of working. But that being said, for me intuition also includes something a little bit more vague and a little bit more unclear or unsure. It kind of taps into those things about the mind that we don't understand. Like the kind of situations where we end up with information that we didn't know we had and that we can't see how we could have had it. Situations where we might experience precognition, or things like telepathy, that kind of thing. Strange dreams that then come about, dreams that we have where we feel like we've tapped into what's going on in somebody else's life, all that kind of thing. And whereas you can definitely explain away a lot of those experiences in terms of sort of psychology and science, there's definitely an awful lot of stuff going on there with the human mind that is not completely understood, and all of that, or some of that for me, falls under the label of intuition. So very much tying in with that is the idea of synchronicity for me, and this is for me how synchronicity comes into a tarot reading or an intuitive reading of any kind. And this is where we start getting into the hazy zone of really not understanding what's going on at all, because intuition to some extent explains the situation, it explains what's happening, it explains the process, it's giving you an idea of how somebody might somehow seemingly magically have this information about you or be able to offer you extremely potent and relevant advice without actually knowing or being told, certainly being told or consciously knowing an awful lot about your situation. Intuition kind of explains things on a more, I suppose, a more naturalistic level, whereas when you come into synchronicity, it gets a little bit hazier again, and that's another thing that sure, there are elements of synchronicity and that kind of thing that can be explained again by science, but you're definitely starting to touch the parts of the human mind and the parts of the human experience that are just not so well understood. I do kind of want to say as well that although I definitely come to things from a naturalistic perspective, all of these things like intuition and synchronicity, it's not even that these are things that I came to accept were possible through coming to paganism or through using tarot. It is actually something that I grew up with as well, because I don't really want to mention which family member it is because I feel like it's maybe slightly private, but one of my family members has a lot of experience with things like, what seems like telepathy, precognition, and that kind of thing. And they are actually an extremely kind of scientifically minded, very pragmatic kind of person. I would say that they are, generally speaking, they're absolutely a naturalist actually. They just have this very open idea about how the world works. I will say that this is a parental figure. I don't feel like that's narrowing it down too much, but just in case there's somebody watching this who knows me and who knows them, I don't necessarily want to say which one it is. So yeah, they had all these experiences and I grew up hearing about these experiences, and on the one hand I was growing up with the idea that all of these things were possible and that things that can't be scientifically explained right now definitely happen. But I also grew up with having these things explained to me, or at least having them discussed in the realms of science, or in terms of things about science that we don't understand. So it's definitely from a very naturalistic perspective. But that being said, the naturalism in my family, or that I kind of ascribe to, it definitely doesn't preclude any of these more mysterious experiences that we can have in any part of our life, or more specifically when it comes to intuitive readings. I'm sipping some tea here that I kind of blended myself, so excuse me, it's going to get cold if I don't start drinking it. So I think that's basically all that I wanted to say in terms of explaining where I'm coming from more from the opposite side of where my naturalism comes from. So you could definitely say that I have a very open mind when it comes to these things, and this is why even when I'm explaining how my naturalistic perspective works, and basically always when I'm describing my naturalistic perspective, it's usually the main way that I look at something, or the main way that I interpret something, and it's definitely not a definite for me. For me, there's definitely other possibilities, and other possibilities are always open. But when I'm saying sort of, oh, this is what I believe, but I have great respect for people who believe otherwise, it's not just out of a general respect for people with other beliefs other than me. It's also out of a really solid and firm belief that we don't understand how the universe works. We don't understand, I would say, really some of the most basic fundamental things about the universe and about human beings. I mean, for example, we don't really understand time. We don't really understand energy. Well, we don't even understand what the largest part of mass in the universe is, considering that scientists generally understand the majority, what they think is the majority of mass within the universe to be dark matter. They actually don't know really what it is. And definitely when it comes to the human mind, there's an awful lot about the consciousness and that kind of thing that is really not scientifically, there's not really any very good definitions or working theories going on about how all of these things work. I think that gets overlooked an awful lot in mainstream science, and also just in modern society in general. People, because it's also complicated, we're at a point now with science where an awful lot of things are getting discovered every day, and new theories are coming up all the time. And although we've learned so much about the universe in a very short period of time, there's just so much that isn't understood, but that somehow doesn't get filtered down to the general population, because there's just so much happening that the overall story about that science, about where science is at, it just doesn't get quite filtered down, because it's not straightforward, it's not simple. And, you know, your average person on the street doesn't really want to think about, you know, why time is really complicated and why we don't really understand it, and why we don't really even understand matter or energy or anything. And not most people don't really want to think about that kind of thing. They want to think that everything is straightforward, and that we understand that, you know, matter is made of atoms and we're made of atoms, and all of this is just very mechanistic. It's easier for some people to just see the world like that, and that's fair enough. But I really did want to just put that in there, put that out there, that my worldview doesn't just come from this very scientific kind of perspective, that I'm absolutely open to all sorts of other ideas as well. And that's very, very relevant then when it comes to things like intuitive readings. I've had a couple of tarot or other intuitive readings done, and from a variety of people with a variety of perspectives on the whole thing. You know, like somebody like Kellyanne has maybe a slightly more naturalistic, or at least a worldview that is maybe more in line with mine, say, than somebody else who's, for example, Kimmy of Autumn Star Moon. I recently got an 8 crystal intuitive reading from her, where she chooses some crystals and gives you a reading based on the feelings that you get from those crystals. And that was just as powerful for me, maybe in a slightly different way, but it was just as powerful for me as Kellyanne's reading was. And I have my own theories on why that works for her, and they're slightly different to hers. But that's not a problem for me, because at the end of the day I feel like, well, maybe her ideas of, say, spirit guides and things like that, maybe they're just different words for the same ideas that I have about that kind of thing, which is all about connectivity and our perception of time and space being not quite what we think it is. Or, sorry, that wasn't a very good sentence. That our perception of time and space isn't quite accurate, maybe, or that it's more fluid maybe than we think it is. I think I'm going to wrap it up there for the moment. I think this is something I'm going to be talking and thinking about a bit more in weeks to come, because it's something that I'm thinking about a lot more right now, because I feel like I've gotten myself quite firm in my beliefs and my practice and that kind of thing, and I'm starting to tie in together all the different aspects of my beliefs. I've said before in my blog, and I wrote a blog post about it, and I think I've mentioned this before, that I sometimes experience a bit of a clash between my logical thinking brain and my emotional, intuitive brain. But I don't think there necessarily has to be a clash there. I think it's just, they're all just different ways of looking at the universe, and it doesn't mean that one perspective is right and the other perspective is wrong. Thanks for listening, guys.